think the key message is not about what it might look like in 2050, but about what we need to do now to ensure we don't see that by 2050.
So Balbeg Estate's about 400 acres, about 300 with trees. We have 5 holiday houses. We can sleep just almost 50 people in them. So net zero to me, I think it's a problem is because it's not really fully understood, and people have this concept of net zero, we're green, are we not green? There's a bit of greenwashing going on. So we focus more on doing the right thing for the environment, the right thing financially, because obviously it all has to pay. The move to net zero probably is increasingly important for our business, both to save money and to do the right thing for the environment, but also to attract guests. You know, we're attracting people to come and enjoy the countryside, and they are interested, they are asking questions about, you know, where's your energy produced, how many trees. Not many people actually understand what we do and they don't really want to see it, but the fact that it's done and we are moving that green agenda forward, they're happy with and they come because of that. Probably the biggest challenge for me is you don't really know what the technologies are, what you're trying to achieve, so you've got to just spend a bit of time finding people that know what they're talking about. And once you find those people, they can take over and I can just step in the background and guide them and so on. If government doesn't meet the net zero targets, I don't really care. I do care from a wider society case, but I look after Balbeg and I'll make sure it's making a difference in its own way. But the wider targets, I can't influence them at all. So it's really up to other people to worry about that.
The weather is becoming a huge challenge. I have seen some really dramatic impacts from changing weather patterns, which are an obvious result of climate change. This shed that we're stood in now would normally be full of winter wheat, but because of the year that we've had, we haven't managed to drill the crops that we would normally choose and prioritise. So we're having to adapt in such a significant way to try and farm in a really volatile weather system. For me, the term net zero is a very big phrase. It gets chucked around a lot. A circular system of ensuring that our emissions are as low as they can possibly be in the way that we produce food, and also putting in measures to sequester as much carbon as we possibly can. A big challenge when thinking about adapting and the uptake of a new practice is often the cost with making that change. Big challenge with farmers has been the mindset and ability to change when you're used to doing something in the same way for so long. If we don't reach our net zero target by 2050, we will stay on this path of more extreme weather. I don't want to farm in a world where we're seeing more extreme weather. I don't want to see people growing up in that world. So I think the key message is not about what it might look like in 2050, but about what we need to do now to ensure we don't see that by 2050.
For me, net zero is going to be a combination between being environmentally sustainable and being profitable, economically sustainable. I'm fairly confident here we can produce milk with a fairly low carbon footprint. For us, it's very important to get the basics right on the farm, so cows are in good health, making sure they have a calve every year, and making sure that, you know, the grass grows, we have good grass growth on the farm with really good quality. And if we get those basics right, then we can start to manipulate certain changes through the farm. The drive to net zero has to, it has to correlate to the drive to be profitable and to make money. And what we're finding with the projects that we're involved in, that quite a lot of the low-hanging fruit that can improve our carbon footprint to drive us towards net zero can also have the same correlation for profitability. We're learning every year, and every year has different challenges. The climate is changing. We're finding a lot more volatility in our weather, so prolonged wet spells that give us challenges in terms of getting the cows to grass effectively without, poaching the land. We're also seeing perhaps longer dry spells that we didn't see, in previous years. They have challenges on both sides of the scale. This is maybe not what you want to hear. It's not really financially worthwhile for us to really go down the road of trying to get to net zero, because it's going to involve, I don't know what it's going to involve, I don't think anybody does, but will it involve reducing our stocking rate, and we won't be able to sell as much milk to get to net zero. But nobody's going to pay us to be net zero. People pay us to produce really good quality milk. That's where our income is from. But I can't afford to do that, really.
I think there's something really fundamentally wrong with the way that we interact with land and with nature. We've become very disconnected. And yeah, I think that, fundamentally behind the issue of climate change is the issue of sort of continuous drive for growth at the expense of the environment. The term net zero is quite reductive as a way of thinking about the environment and thinking about better land use systems. But I do think, given it's very much in the kind of policy lexicon, I do think it's very important that we are pushing for a definition of net zero that really actually does mean that we're reducing emissions, but in a way that's fair to everybody as well. One of the main challenges for introducing the kind of ideas that we're working on is that they really go against what sort of large-scale agribusiness has been pushing for decades. The lobbying power of agribusiness is absolutely huge. And we've just kind of had this narrative of, we need to produce more, we need to produce it as much as possible, whatever the costs, as cheaply as possible. And it's kind of, us against nature. For the Land Workers Alliance, we've got members across Scotland, we've got market gardeners in Shetland, and then we've got kind of arable farmers closer to here. And we've also got, people in the crofting counties as well. So, our members are really diverse. A lot of them are working at small or medium scale. A lot of those people are not getting a lot of support from the government at the moment, although with the type of farming that they're practicing, they are able to, really produce a lot of food on a small area of land in a way that is really beneficial to nature.
The term net zero is used quite flippantly now. The way I understand net zero is farming in a way that reduces emissions or the negative impact to the planet. Even before getting a farm, we already knew that we want to farm with nature, because I think it's easier to farm with nature than against it. I find that the way the climate is changing, people might have to start adapting in what you're farming. So I remember when I was on an indoor farm a few years back, we lost a sow to heat stress. That's the first sow I've ever seen die from heat stress. And that's because the summers were getting too hot. The aircon system couldn't keep up. I was having to hose the sows with cold water to try and help them cool down. Some parts of the business we can't control, i.e. using abattoirs. Both our closest ones are far enough that it sort of almost ruins our work trying to be as close to net zero as possible, but it's something we can't control, unfortunately. If you've got someone producing pork at, let's say, £2.40, £2.50 a kilo, and you're selling it for £1.90, how does that work? Because why are we allowed to sell product to be low cost of production? Like you wouldn't do that for a car. So why are we doing that for food? We could live without cars. We can't live without food. Ideally, I'd like to keep farming and still do as direct sales as possible, because I cannot. There's no way I'm going to have my destiny dictated by someone that has no input in my working at all. They don't see or they don't even appreciate it, and then they're determining what I'm getting, what reward I'm getting for my hard work. No chance.
My understanding of net zero is working together as industries, so not just the agricultural industry, but every industry and individuals globally, really, to try and reduce our carbon footprint wherever we can. So our aim as a business is to try and produce food, to do that in the most sustainable and efficient a way as possible. And if that is helping us to achieve the net zero, and I'm very proud to be able to play my role in that aspect. Mwyn I ni allu parhau y meamaethu, mae'n hynod o bwysig bod ni'n cael yr gefnogaeth yna i allu cario ymlaen I meithio yma. Mae'r ffarm fynyddig teuluol fel hyn yn cadw gymaint o fusnesau eraill I fynd o fewn y cwm a'r gymuned. Os gollwn ni'r ffermydd mynydd Cymraeg neu fferm deuluol Cymraeg, yn anffodus dwi'n teimlo da ni'n colli gymaint o gymunedau eraill a cymunedau Cymraeg o fewn Nghymru hefyd, sydd fyddai'n dorcalonus petai hynny'n dod I hynny. I suppose the main challenge is to try and adapt or try something new is the unknown, obviously, sometimes. It's great to have things like Farming Connect in place where they trial projects and trial ideas, and you can sort of learn off that and have a bit more leap of faith to go for it, really. But, if you are trialling something very new to your farm, it's sort of that daunting feeling of not knowing if it'll work or not and what are the obligations, because ultimately it is a business.
Am I optimistic about getting there? You'd have to say being a realist, no. Is there a difference between being optimistic and being hopeful? I'm hopeful, maybe not that optimistic. And I'm hopeful that the next generation will be better at facing up to the issues. But reason for optimism is that the changes that are necessary are actually positive. Positive for the farming businesses and positive for the world in which we live. The main challenge to bringing new things in, the lack of recognition systems from either the market or from government is a barrier. There's also a knowledge barrier, but we draw on as many people as we possibly can to learn what's what. Yes, it means change, and we're exploring change where we can. Some elements of change that I know will come are totally out with our control. We are trying things that are in our control. What happens to us if government doesn't get to net zero, or if our sector doesn't get to net zero 2050? If we don't get there quickly, I'll be dead worried for the next generation. You need predictability in weather to grow food. Now, it doesn't matter if you're a cereal farmer or what kind of farming you're doing. If it got much warmer, it got much colder, but it was predictable, you would be able to cope with that. It's the unpredictability. And that scares me rigid.